We're going to debate evolution and whether humans and chimps share a common ancestor. The reason this is a particularly important aspect of evolution because it's the aspect that Subboor has said is the thing that Islam is clear about didn't happen, and I think the evidence is clear that it did happen. So I'll just present a little bit of evidence. There's lots of it. We've got evidence from genetics, from paleontology, from archaeology, from biogeography, many fields of study. I'll just start with like one paper that's very important. It's this paper here. It was in Nature. It's the sequence of the chimpanzee genome, and it's done by the chimpanzee consortium, genome sequencing consortium, and many of the world's leading genomic institutes signed off on this paper. And this is what they said. They said more than a century ago, Darwin and Huxley posited that humans share recent common ancestors with the African great apes. Modern molecular studies have spectacularly confirmed this prediction. So, you know, they don't usually have in science journals like quite such strong language. But the reason it's strong is because we really do have spectacular evidence for it. So let me give you just a couple of examples. So there are genes that get duplicated, and when they get duplicated, they can malfunction. They can lose their original function, shall we say. And these are called pseudogenes. And if you look at the chimp genome, there's many pseudogenes there. Just take one example. There's a pseudogene called nanog. And if you look at how many pseudogene copies they have, the chimpanzee genome has 10 pseudogenes of nanog. So if you like, these are like shared errors. So imagine someone hands you some homework, and then the teacher goes, hang on, I know that guy's older brother, and he handed in a very similar piece of homework 2 years ago. How would you know if you copied it? Well, if they had the same typos, you know, that would be very good evidence that it's been copied, or they'd have a same source. And this is what we're talking about here. They've got the same errors in the same locations. That's very hard to explain if evolution is not true, but if evolution is true, perfectly explained. Now, if you look, these are the nanog pseudogenes. And if you look, let me just finish this point, okay, and then come back, okay? So you can see that they're in the same locations, same errors, but there's one nanog pseudogene that humans have that chimps don't have. Okay, that is nanog P8, not present in the chimpanzee genome. Now, if evolution is true, there's one way to explain that, and that is nanog P8 must have become a pseudogene after we split with chimps. So now what we can do is use molecular clock technology, and we can see if that's true. If evolution is true, that must be true. So they looked for that, and this is what they said. Human nanog P gene is located on human chromosome 15. It is the most recent of the nanog process pseudogenes, exactly as evolution predicts.
Which is based on a probabilistic framework which has assumptions. It is that human chimp ancestry is not true literally. It is not a fact in the absolute sense, in the sense that it doesn't change and that it cannot be corrected due to future information. It is a scientific hypothesis which is based on a probabilistic framework which has assumptions, and there can be core disputes about it. Now,
okay, let's just go back. Stop there. James, did you want to say something here or a bit further on?
Maybe just a little bit further on.
Okay, so again, to me, he shoots himself immediately in the foot with his PAD story here. You know, it's probabilistic, has assumptions and core disputes. You know, his usual catchphrases here. It's not true he said it's not true in the literal sense. I mean, what is the literal sense? What he really means, presumably, is it's not true in the absolute philosophical sense. But if that's the case, what is true in the absolute philosophical case? And he just shoots himself in the foot if he's going to go this route. And no, you know, advanced theist that I'm aware of tries to go this route. Certainly not as basic and poor as he's trying to do here. So, and I don't know whether he's trying to take this from Plantinga or somebody else. But you know, this just to me is And Phil will get there anyway, but this is just already shot himself in the foot here, because then he can never appeal to science for anything ever. He's just got to appeal to the the book.
The thing is, he's right. This is the point. This is quite funny that people don't actually appreciate it. He is right in what he's saying, but this is a fact. This is the definition that I've brought in the beginning of science. This is why we have the philosophy of science, which actually goes and explains all these things that he is now claiming, oh my God, this is science. No, that's exactly what it is. But he's making it out that this is something bad. It's not. It's actually the strength of science to be exactly the way that it is.
The other thing is that he's trying to conflate absolute truth with whether we have a method of being certain of the absolute truth. So obviously, kind of, I think it's fair to say that science doesn't give us a method to be absolutely certain of the truth. But those things that, like, I know, for example, that iron is more dense than carbon, kind of, we still have that thing is true, even though we can't absolutely be certain of it. So all these things might still have underlying truth, but even though we can't kind of be absolutely certain about it. So yeah,
we don't need certainty, do we? We need reliability. We don't run our lives, and science doesn't work on absolutes. But then again, what else works on absolutes apart from, as you say, mathematics? But certainly the one thing that we can't say is that the Quran works on absolutes. Where's the evidence for that? That's so, the evidence works completely against that. So, but of course, we've got to understand the whole point here is to try and undermine science. That's the entire point. That's the hidden assumption in this entire video. Undermine science. If you can undermine science, well, now you don't have such a blunt hammer against, Islam. All you've got is philosophy, and that can go either way, blah, blah, blah. And so that's the entire point here.
Slide, because he said a lot of things I want to deal with each one at a time, right? So let's go back to your first slide.
Sure.
And the way we're going to do this is that once he makes a point, then I'm going to address those points, and then he can carry on making new points.
Okay,
go
that's
back.
Fine, yeah. There you go.
First slide.
Sorry, yeah.
First slide. Your first slide.
Oh, okay.
Right. So give me that for a second. Sure. So the first thing that Phil did, and I think this is very important, is that he basically said this is the evidence for human-chimp ancestry. He spoke about genetics, paleontology, archaeology, biogeography, right? Now these are different fields. Now the first point to make is any scientific conclusion in any scientific field can be revised based upon new information. So for example, you were mentioning about pseudogenes. Another piece of evidence which was used apart from pseudogenes was junk DNA. Junk DNA was used as evidence that we have natural selection responsible for leaving behind all this extra junk. Natural selection, the way it works is it's a very wasteful process.
This is bullshit.
James, I think James wanted to come in here or somewhere around.
He doesn't understand what he's talking about. Okay, sorry, James.
Yeah, I might as well kind of do it here. So when you're talking about junk DNA, kind of Subboor is referring to how there's been a research project called ENCODE, which looks at all of the DNA which doesn't code for any proteins, and that's most of our DNA. And they looked for they looked for two criteria to check whether there's any evidence that they could potentially have any other functionality besides kind of coding for proteins. And that's and those two areas are, one, whether it might regulate the expression of other proteins and other genes, and two, whether that region of DNA is still read and produces RNA, which is like the kind of messenger which might kind of end up being kind of turned into a protein, but it doesn't actually do that. It only produces the RNA messenger. And those are two very kind of liberal. They applied a very liberal standard, so that they kind of found they kind of compiled a list of every gene which could potentially have some functionality. Okay, so they went for sensitivity rather than selectivity, and you can read this all from ENCODE's own website. But the really two important things are, one, that even according to ENCODE's own website, two of the genes which Phil mentioned, nano GP10 and nano GP11, have absolutely zero functionality according to any of the markers or indicators that they tested for. Like, it didn't express any RNA at all in any tissue, and it didn't whatchamacallit, and it didn't have a match for any of the markers in terms of regulatory activity. So so even when you apply this very liberal standard, you still find 2 examples of whole pseudogenes that were copied, 300 base pairs at least, and replicated in the equivalent places in both the the chimpanzee and human beings. And so it's just like Phil says, like, these are clear examples of, like, if you have a person doing homework and then 2 people doing homework and they both have the mistakes in the same areas, because you can't say that these you have very good reason at this point, very good evidence that these kind of pseudogenes have no functionality. Okay, so they would just be considered like typos in the homework example. And so and so we need to kind of consider what Subboor's default defense is for any time kind of you point out a similarity between chimpanzees and humans. What he does is he says, aha, but that's a homology. You're assuming that because these 2 species are similar in some way, that similarity must be due to a close ancestor, rather than they might simply just, the alternative is that they might simply have just been designed that way by God. Okay, but you need to think about how this so this example, this defense rather, is tenuous to begin with, even when you're just thinking about, like, humans and chimpanzees having the same bone structure or the same kind of physiology. Like, why would God want us to be this similar to chimpanzees, even though he created us totally separately? Okay, so it's tenuous to begin with, but it becomes an order of magnitude more tenuous when you say that, oh, God wants us to be so similar. But God created, chimpanzees and humans separately, but he wanted us to be so similar that he even wanted us to have the exact same errors in the exact same places.
James, do you think that would have been, obviously with hindsight, we can obviously look at both sides. Do you think that's something that A, Phil missed, or B, that he could have honed in a lot more like you did? So to bring this up and go, okay, so what's the alternative? And then gone through it like you've said and gone, hey, if you believe that this is that God created these 2, separately, and all the errors are also being created separately, does that make sense? And now, of course, I suppose the only argument could be, well, God's mysterious, we don't know. But
yeah, well, the thing is, he did say it so succinctly and perfectly when he kind of just stated clearly, these are errors, these are equivalent to typos in the same places on the same homeworks. He did explain it. It's just like Subboor continued on and continued making other errors, which Phil decided to kind of get onto. So, like,
what I mean is bringing up the example like you did, which is the opposite, saying, so, okay, Subboor, if you think this is wrong, in the Islamic point of view, how would you explain this? Because presumably, and you might even have to spell it out, because he won't spell it out, because the moment you start to spell it out, it sounds ridiculous like you've just done. So it almost requires you, James, or Phil, to spell out the alternative, not to allow him to spell it out, because he won't spell it out. Because the moment it comes out of his mouth, if it were to come out of his mouth, he'd go, oh my God, that sounds so stupid. So you've got to do it for him, which is the only other alternative.
Yeah, the thing is, whenever you start talking about the alternative, he'll kind of bring up this other kind of major talking point, which is, oh, but science doesn't even allow for the alternative under methodological naturalism. And so he'll divert it totally into methodological naturalism, which is kind of assuming that any phenomena in the physical universe can't be due to God or some other supernatural being. But Phil's already explained this when he was talking to Hamza in another video, that you can still apply the scientific method of experimental protocol to supposed supernatural phenomena. For example, you can do a test, a rigorous experiment to check whether prayer works better than a control, better than a control for different religions, and check whether prayer helps people recover from cancer. So you're right. It would be better to, like, really expose just how ridiculous Subboor is asking us to believe in the alternative. But Subboor won't go there. He has, like, he'll try very hard not to go there, and you'll really need to cajole him, and so on and so forth.
Phil is more used to, and if you go on his channel on SkyDivePhil, go and have a look on Phil's channel. He's done a couple of debates with actual smart people. There was a Christian philosopher, theist. He's done 2 debates on animal suffering. If you go and listen to that, he's used to a much higher level debate with people that have looked into this, that are trying to answer his points, and he's trying to answer theirs. So he's not used to this sort of thing. And he will say it. I've got the copies of the emails of this. He did ask for Subboor for a formal debate. He was happy to do it online as well. He even suggested, which I think is one of the best ways to do it and the most honest, is to swap sources. So you can check each other's sources, and then you can come back with the strongest possible response. Because I think any intellectually honest person would go, hey, I want to hear what my opponent's strongest, I don't want to try and catch them out because that's intellectually dishonest. I want to know what their strongest response is so that I can address that. And of course, none of that was acceptable. It had to be done in the park because Phil doesn't have a degree. Actually, he does have a degree, but it wasn't a degree that Subboor is happy with. So Subboor supposedly only wants to debate people with a degree in a formal setting, even though he doesn't have a degree himself. So I think that says everything.
Okay. Continue?
Yeah, go for it.
Process which punishes for, it rewards for a slight incremental advantage, and it punishes for something which is wasteful. Now, when it actually comes to junk DNA, we later on discovered that wasn't actually junk. Much of it was actually functional. So if you're going to point at something in genetics, whether it's pseudogenes or junk DNA or something else, the same principle applies. The problem of induction is the reason why we can't say that it's absolutely true. Now, about these particular fields, so whether it's genetics, biochemistry, linguistics, biogeography, anatomy, or the fossil record, each of these, when it comes to human-chimp ancestry, this is still based upon homology. Now, homology is the assumption that similarities, whether at genetic or anatomical or biochemical level, are due to common ancestry.
Come on. He throws this around a lot. I mean, homology is simply that you see very similar traits in different species. And he's mixing this up with everything, doesn't understand it, doesn't see what it is. He brings this up, and I can see, look at the face of Phil. He says, what the hell is this guy on about? Is he serious? He's talking total nonsense.
Now, for someone to say that it is a fact, what they're basically doing is they're assuming that there is an argument to be made. Now, the argument which is actually put forward goes like this, and I want Phil to tell me whether he agrees with this argument. Similarities are due to common descent. Hey, look, similarities exist. Therefore, we have evidence of human-chimp ancestry, or therefore we have evidence of homology being true. Do you agree with this argument? No, you don't.
No one in evolutionary biology thinks that, right? That's just ridiculous.
So you don't believe it's a fact?
No, I believe human-chimp common ancestry is a fact, but it's not a fact just because humans and chimps are similar. No one is saying
that's fine,
right? No one is saying because they're similar, therefore they have a common ancestry.
Sure. So the
fact, if you listen to what I said, we're actually looking at the dissimilarities as well as the similarities. Sure. There are subtle patterns between similarities and dissimilarities. So if you take nano-P8, nano-P8 is not in the chimp genome, right? Right, so we're not just talking about similarities, we're talking about the dissimilarities as well. But there are consequences of the similarities and the dissimilarities. The way you assess this is the theory makes a number of precise predictions, and then using very parsimonious assumptions. Yep. Then again and again, if you keep finding that the predictions are found by the evidence, then you say that theory is true.
Okay, should I go to the next point?
Yeah, but just on that, he put the point to Phil, and Phil obviously said no, nobody actually believed this. And maybe there's the case of like, why would you say that's true? Can you name anybody but yourself that's a respected person that says this? or is there any peer-reviewed information? Why are you making this claim that virtually nobody accepts? Do you believe it? If so, why do you believe it? Because I think the other thing was, obviously he's defending common human chimp common ancestry, but at the same time, it's all very well to put it back. And I don't think he's all on the defensive here. At no point is he responding to Subboor and asking, why would you ever say that? And I think maybe that's something that he could have done. And what is your response to this?
Correct. Yeah.
He probably quotes kind of some like someone like William Lane Craig or some other kind of intellectual who's coming from a kind of totally theist kind of agenda. So I think Subboor might be kind of prepared for that. But yeah, he obviously it's not, and also he has like a bunch of people who he misquotes and stuff. So but yeah,
so he's memorized a few of these cherry-picked quote-mined quotes that can come up at any minute. And now you need to have read the book, or even have the book with you, or whatever the case. And I think Phil actually had some of the quotes here on the iPad. But this, and this is where you've said it correctly, Stops, as well. Phil is such a gentleman here. You've got to realize who you're dealing with here, and you've got to raise the energy a bit and put it in his face. Read this here. Hey, don't say another word. Read what I've got in the book. What does this say? This is the same book you quoted, but you've got to know this ahead of time. Now, you did some homework, obviously, but you're not going to know every single quote there is. But you have to deal a bit differently with individuals like this at Speaker's Corner, which is not what Phil is used to dealing with.
Also, Phil made a really good sorry about that. So Phil made a really good point in that kind of the science gives us predictability, and so kind of if you're a sensible person and you have two competing explanations for the world, one, let's take the phenomenon of friction. If one model says that kind of friction happens because there's a coefficient of friction, and you can measure it across different surfaces, and you can predict based on that kind of how far the kind of object will slide at a given kind of weight and a given momentum. If you can do that, that's what one model gives you. It gives you predictive value, and then another model kind of accounts kind of perfectly, but doesn't give you any predictive value. So, for example, I could also come up with an alternative model that objects slow down due to friction because there are invisible devils that kind of are really tiny, and they kind of push against the object when they feel it's being moved on their territory because they like things to be still. Kind of one model has predictive value, and the other model just accounts for previous kind of observations, but doesn't give you any predictive value. Evolution has given us a lot of predictive value because there are lots of experiments that have been done. For example, one really great example is that one kind of consequence of evolutionary theory is kin selection theory. The idea that you would evolve species are probably going to evolve behaviors where they look after their members of their species that are more closely related to them than members of the species that are less closely related to them. And one of the predictions from this rich body of theory is that you can predict from this theory how wasps will lay their eggs in kind of disabled spiders. There are parasitic wasps that lay their eggs in disabled spiders, and based on kin selection theory, you can predict how the wasps will change the ratio of males to females in the eggs that they lay on that disabled spider, based on whether that spider has already had eggs laid in it from another wasp. And so that's clear predictive value that evolutionary theory offers. And again, when you're if you're given an alternative theory that explains the same thing, like, oh yes, all animals are the way they are because God did it, that doesn't give you any predictive value. So so that's another thing that if you're rational, you'll pay attention to, and you'll use to decide, what should I place more belief in? Should I place the belief in the tiny devils or the leprechauns or God, or should I place my belief in the thing that can actually predict what will happen in the world? So there you go.
Yes, and also it's not falsifiable. How do you falsify that premise about your little theories? I don't see any way to falsify that either.
Now, wait, hang on. Let me just go on to what you said. Hang on, I want to address
his grandfather. He believes in linguistics or whatever. Therefore, common ancestry is truth. I want you to tell me, do you disagree with the premises or the conclusion?
Okay, what I would say is I disagree with your premises. Okay, you don't start. I mean, there may have been people that thought. Hang on, let me finish. Because you spoke and I didn't interrupt you. Okay, right. So it's certainly true. There are people that thought human-chimp common ancestry were true before we have the evidence. That's true. Okay, but when you go and do the genetic tests, right? When you do the genetic test, you don't know what the answer is. The genetic tests give you an answer there. Okay, so you can go in there doing that experiment. You can do that experiment without any presupposition about whether human and chimps have a common ancestor or whether they don't. So if you take the example that I gave, notice that Subboor did not really counter any of the evidence I actually presented. Hang on, please say this right? Okay. I said if evolution is true, then we should find that nano P8 is the youngest of all the nano pseudogenes. Okay. But homology doesn't tell you which of those nanogenes are the youngest, does it?
Yeah, but you're using homology.
It doesn't tell you which are the youngest. It doesn't tell you a date.
Look,
does it?
Phil, you're making an argument which is that genetics has given us something new.
It's not me giving the argument. This is what all of the people on the chimpanzee genome consortium say. Okay, don't make this about me, right? Okay,
this is your interpretation of what they're saying.
Okay, well, I mean, it's damn clear what they said. Spectacularly.
Okay, so Phil, tell me this.
Spectacularly confirmed.
Sure. So
that's what they said.
Okay. That's not what they
right?
said.
Now, you see, here's what they said. I'm sorry. I'll pull it back up just so you tell me what you read that out. Hang on. Read that out. Where's more than a century ago? What paper is this? This is, I told you, initial sequence of the chimpanzee genome in comparison with.
And what is that? What is that? Comparison, which is homology.
Yeah, but you're comparing to see whether homology is true or not. And the data could come back not, couldn't it?
Yeah, but hang on.
Right, is it true or false that the data could come back and say not homology?
You put the cart before the horse. Let me just explain what's going on here. When you go out and look in the world, there's no such thing as looking at scientific evidence, observations, and then coming up with a hypothesis. That doesn't exist. You don't go out in the world.
This guy's such a clown.
Also notice when Phil asked him to read there, he wouldn't read it. No. So you'll notice but I think he did a good thing. Read what it says here. No, don't say anything else. Read what it says here. Because when somebody else says it, this is something in psychology, obviously. When somebody else says something, you evaluate it one way. When you say it, you evaluate it very differently. And so you notice he wouldn't read out that it's been spectacularly confirmed, because then it's coming out of his own mouth what they've actually said. So he diverted from doing that. It's a common psychological thing. When you're presented with something, you don't want to admit it yourself.
Exactly. It didn't fit because he saw it doesn't fit his homology thing because it takes him off his script. And that's the whole thing.
Yeah, and if you watch closely his body language when Phil finished there and he wanted to start, it was like there was a big pause there. It's like, what am I going to say now? And then launch into something that I've got rehearsed. I'm not going to address your points. I'm not going to address the fact that homology can be falsified. I'm going to run into one of my scripts. And here we go. James, you unmuted. Did you want to say something there?
There's nothing wrong with doing exploratory data analysis, where you you just start off looking at some data and then you see a pattern. Then you can test whether that pattern exists, and that's fine as long as you look at another set of data, which is what scientists always do. If you're not, it's well known that you're not allowed to kind of do exploratory data analysis, then do your actual experiment on the same piece of data after you've developed your hypothesis. But it's totally fine to look at a bunch of data to come up with a hypothesis, just as long as you test the hypothesis on a separate set of data. Whereas but Subboor is acting like this is an absolute faux pas and it's totally illegal to do this. But it's not. You just need to make sure that you don't kind of use the same data that you use to develop your hypothesis. So, and I'm sure Phil will explain this in coming up, but I just wanted to show that there's a grain of truth in what Subboor is saying, but it's totally irrelevant and totally out of place and not applicable to this particular situation, because it's but that's the kind of like sort of theory behind it anyway.
No, but I thank you for saying that as well, James. But you can notice as well what you said there. A, it takes a little while to explain, but B, I think anybody who's watching, who's not paying attention and wanting to hear what you've got to say, that'll bypass and that'll be like over their heads. So that point there, you know, it almost needs to be rehearsed and be able to said in a very clear, quick, concise way that has impact. Because what you've said is entirely true, but it doesn't sound good enough to people who are either not paying attention or don't understand what that means. So thank you for sharing that, and hopefully some people will take something from that. So it can be, and actually Phil does say at some point that, you know, you don't have to always start with the hypothesis, but you've clarified if you do it the other way, one of the ways, or probably the main way in which you would then need to move forward, doing it quote unquote the opposite way around.
When you go out and look in the world, there's no such thing as looking at scientific evidence, observations, and then coming up with a hypothesis. That doesn't exist. You don't go out in the world, look for observations, and come up with a scientific hypothesis. No. What you do is you start off with a hypothesis, and then you go out and look for evidence.
It goes both ways, but that's a good point. So, I can give you an example.
Darwin himself, what he basically said is this. He said if science doesn't proceed by beginning off with a hypothesis and then looking for evidence, then you might as well go to a quarry and count pebbles. Now, this issue is a well understood problem in the philosophy of science, that you have the theory ladenness of observation because of this issue. Now, when you are doing a study like this and you say we've come to a conclusion, that conclusion starts off with an assumption, as it does in the title of the paper, which is the assumption of homology. Comparison.
That's not one last thing of the paper at all. That's false.
Comparison.
They're comparing. So
comparing what are they comparing? Me and the tree, or they're comparing humans and chimps?
See, this is all he knows. All he knows is this comparison, this homology. This is all he has heard, and he always tries to get back on this, onto this.
Homology.
No.
That's not homology?
No, it isn't. Because homology is, okay, let's explain. So those people that aren't familiar, right? Homology is defined, well, it's the definition of homology has changed over time, okay? So before it was just similarity, okay? Now we think it's similarity due to common descent. That's how the homology is generally understood.
No, that's not quite true.
Let me finish, right? Okay? But this is the important point. The important point... No, because some are trivial, right? Some less trivial, okay? Right. So the point is, there's nothing in the title of the paper that says anything about homology.
What?
Okay.
Read the title again.
Initial sequence of the chimpanzee genome and comparison with the human.
Comparison of genomes is homology.
Okay. No, it's not. I'll tell you. I'll explain why. If they're homologous, then we look to see. Like, take the example I gave. We look to see if they're homologous, then nano pH should be the youngest of the pseudogenes. Yep. We don't know that ahead of time. We do molecular clock data, and then we see, is it homologous or is it not homologous? Okay? It's not decided ahead of time.
Yeah, now, the assumption is there, though.
Okay, yes, the assumption. I don't disagree with that.
And that assumption, so you previously said it's a conclusion on assumption.
No, I'm saying, what I'm saying is, you're misconstruing what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you don't just derive homology from an assumption of homology. What I said was, that doesn't make any sense. What I said is that you derive common ancestry from the evidence, not from the assumption of common ancestry. Okay. I'm not saying no one ever assumed there was common ancestry. Okay. Obviously they did.
Let's delve down to genetics. Okay. Do you think genetics gives evidence for human chimp ancestry to be true literally?
Well, it depends what you mean by true literally.
Forget that. Do you think it's evidence?
Yes, of course.
Apart from homology.
It's spectacularly.
Okay, so show me this. Is that anything apart from homology? Is genetics, has it taught us anything apart from homology?
Well, of course, genetics has lots of
in terms of human chimp ancestry.
In terms of human chimp ancestry, what it's taught us is that humans and chimps share a common ancestry.
No, that's right. Let me give you evidence.
No, it's not.
Let me give you.
That is exactly what all the people in the field say, and that's what the evidence points.
That's not true. Let me give you.
Stop it there for a moment. Stop. Let's listen now. He said he's going to give evidence that that's not true. So let's pay attention now with our ears to quote unquote what the evidence is that it's not true that genetics has given us, to use his words, I've not heard those words before, new information or information to corroborate human chimp ancestry. Now he's going to apparently give us evidence to the contrary of that. So let's listen to see if we actually hear this quote unquote evidence.
Problem that Aaron Ra came up with, right? He thought genetics was something different to homology, right? Like it brought something new in. But you have to put it this way: a scientist walks into a lab, he walks in with a certain assumptions. One of the assumptions is that of homology. That is a given assumption before you even enter the lab, right? Now that assumption does not change because of something you observe. It is still an assumption.
Yeah, but you can invalidate the assumption via observation. If NaNoPA was not the youngest of the pseudo-genes, right, that would be evidence against the assumption of common ancestry,
Okay,
would it not?
no.
Do you agree or disagree?
Let me
No, answer that. Do you agree or disagree?
What day of the week is it? Yes or no? Let me break down your
No.
question.
I've asked you a very serious question. If it turned out that NaNoPA was not the youngest of the pseudo-genes, if it was 100 million years old, that would be very strong evidence against human common ancestry, would it not?
No, it wouldn't.
Why not?
I'll tell you why. Because homology, the idea that humans they did not come in the history of the world by themselves, de novo. They are linked to something else, primates or whatever. This is a basic assumption in science, and there is no piece of evidence that can go against it.
Okay, there we go. There's the key point. There is no piece of evidence in his mind that can go against this. Phil has given a clear falsification test. He didn't understand going that deep anyway, but we've now been exposed to it. There's no evidence in his mind that will dispute this claim of his. What is the point of speaking to this person?
Yeah. I'm sorry, Subboor, you're an idiot. I'm sorry, this in the true sense of the word, really. I mean, this is so stupid. This is...
But can you see as well, he did press him to answer the question. And of course, he A, because he didn't understand it very well, but B, he wouldn't answer the question. And that's where you are correct, Stops. And Phil is such a gentleman, and he should be, and that's great. And, and this is not, any dig. But in this level, at this, where they're doing this, you've got to press harder. And you don't move on until you press harder and press harder, especially with somebody like this. You can be more charitable to other people, but when you're with somebody like this who's there to score points, doesn't understand, it's not going to answer your questions, you've got to press. So there you go. There's no evidence that will change for him. Now,
but it's intellectually dishonest to the core. Okay, we need to agree on this. This is the worst that you can do. Make an assumption and say, you see, this is the assumption, and because it's an assumption, it's wrong. He does not understand that having an assumption and then verifying it is absolutely, it's a valid approach.
And it can be falsified. I mean, Phil just gave it to him, and he gave him a methodology to have it falsified. Exactly. What else do you need in science? Then the only fallback is to say what he said there, which is complete nonsense, or to claim, well, nothing's absolute in science. And at that stage, you're at the end of the conversation.
Or whatever, this is a basic assumption in science, and there is no piece of evidence that can go against it.
How is that? How would that be? How would that not be evidence against it? You haven't explained anything. You've just stated.
No. Let me explain why.
Okay, go ahead.
And this is linked to my previous point, which I was about to make about genetics. So science begins off with methodological naturalism, which is.
There we go, James. That's exactly what you said, James. He asked him to explain. He just made an assertion. He asked him to give him evidence, and now off he goes.
Yeah.
That anything that we look at, we are going to assume there is a natural explanation.
Okay, this is something I did not go into in the introduction because I didn't think it's necessary. What we need to understand is that science does not preclude anything. If science finds that there is a solution, that there is an explanation, that there is anything that we can measure, that we can observe, that there is empirical evidence that shows there is something super or supranatural, whatever it is, then we are going to evaluate it.
As we've pointed out, and I think James has done so as well, if in fact, prayer could be demonstrated, or if in fact, and Sean Carroll uses this in his book, The Big Picture, if in fact people could resurrect themselves today, or you had a dead person and we could see the cells regenerating this would be evidence against everything that we know about, physics, the laws of physics and everything else. And now we would be in a position to go, well, how is this happening? Can we link this in some way? What methodology we're going to use to find this out? And it could be that, in fact, there would be a link to something, quote, supernatural, whatever that means, because, again, that term is a bit loaded. So, this claim is entirely wrong anyway, but he's going to harp on about it now anyway.
So when you look at me and you, a Blade of Brass or Lady Gaga, they're going to assume we're going to have a naturalistic explanation for this. Correct? You agree with me so far?
I think the answer to that's complicated, so you carry on.
Okay, but I'm going to make a blanket statement. You can challenge it afterwards, which is, that is the very crux of the scientific method, methodological naturalism. So, methodological naturalism means that anything a scientist or evolutionary biologist studies, they're going to assume that they have a natural explanation. Because of that, human beings and chimpanzees, or human beings or something.
Let me just. No. All it says is that what we have so far encountered, what we know, what we have been able to demonstrate so far has always been part of the natural world, or whatever you want to call it. We have never been able to demonstrate anything supernatural. That's all it is. It is not an assumption that everything needs to be there, and it is definitely not a starting point. This is our limitation. Definitely not.
And these primates didn't exist, right? If something else existed, which was, I don't know, whatever, pigs, whatever, right? We would always be linked to something which is non-human, simply because of that assumption of methodological naturalism. So there is no piece of evidence which can go against that foundational assumption of science. Now okay, fine, that's fine. Let me make one more point, which is this. You're saying genetics has added something new, which is exactly what Aaron Ra was saying, which is why I'm disagreeing with both of you at the moment. Genetics, all it tells you is that you have this particular field, just like all the rest of the fields, in which you have an assumption of homology. That's all you actually have. Now, let me give you some evidence. Jonathan Marks, he's an atheist evolutionary biologist. You can check this out yourself. He believes human chimp ancestry is true. He's an atheist. So for him, foundationally, human beings have to be linked to something else in life. Yet he, in his book, which is published by Oxford University, called Evolutionary Anthropology, a New Introduction, right? An alternative introduction.
Here we go. Yeah. And now the name dropping starts.
Yeah, so this is Jonathan Marks, and I just want to find the details for this because my friend Detective Inspector Monkfish, of course, knows all of these things, and I think Phil does as well. And this, he's completely misquoting Marx here, completely cherry picking. In fact, in that same book, Marx says the opposite. So carry on, and I'll see if I can find it.
He says about homology. He says, what has genetics actually taught us from the time of Linnaeus, which is prior Darwin, in terms of genetics? He says absolutely nothing. It can give us new information, but it doesn't change the foundational assumption of homology. Homology is an assumption, and genetics doesn't make it into a conclusion. It is still an assumption, and it will remain an assumption whether you bring out your evidence from genetics or anatomy or biochemistry or the fossil record or linguistics.
Okay, so let me respond. I think what Subboor is saying is completely and utterly false. We don't have to assume on naturalism that humans are related to chimps, and I'll explain why. Because there was a popular belief, goes back to the ancient Greeks, I think it was Anaxagoras that came up with it, and it was only disproved, actually same year, I think as the origin, I think it was 1859, right, called spontaneous creation. Aristotle believed in this, okay, and it was popular up until the 19th century, where it was considered that species spontaneously were created, out of non-living matter, right? So on that, now that can be a perfectly naturalistic scenario, okay? You don't have to believe in God to believe in separate creation. You could have a naturalistic separate creation for all the different species, okay? So there's nothing at all about naturalism that forces you into a conclusion that humans and chimps have to be related. They don't have to be related. Let me finish. Sure. They don't have to be related based off of naturalism. Okay, so naturalism doesn't force you into that conclusion. But what forces you into the conclusion is the evidence. Okay, that evidence. Now, notice that Subboor has not really said any specific problem with the evidence other than a general criticism is based off of naturalism. But as we've seen, because
I said naturalism and then homology.
Okay, but again, you don't have to assume from the outset. You can do a test. The test will tell you. You could say, I start off with the assumption humans and chimps are not related, and then I will look at you could do that.
Okay, so tell me.
You don't have to. Okay, so tell me in fact, just to show you how wrong you are, when the first people started looking for hominid fossils, right? They didn't necessarily assume it was with chimps. Okay, some people thought that the orangutan was the closest, right? And so now, of course, I accept that would be a naturalistic,
and that's homology too.
But my point is, the evidence can check whatever your assumption you start with, right? The evidence can then update what you start with, right? So the evidence could contradict your belief that humans and chimps share a common ancestry. It could easily do so.
You made 2-3 points I need to address.
Okay.
So you admit that it does start off with an assumption.
Okay, what I'm saying is,
okay,
what I'm saying is, you don't have to start with any assumption.
That's fine, but you just admitted right now that you do start with an assumption.
Okay. When you say you, what do you mean by you?
As an evolutionary biologist or a naturalist, or somebody that's looking at this, you start off with the assumption of homology.
Okay. If you're an evolutionary biologist, then you will believe in homology.
Fantastic.
However,
and would you start off with it?
If you start, okay, depends what you mean, right?
Okay.
Let me finish. Let me answer that one. You don't have to start off with this. If you're an evolutionary biologist, you don't have to start with the assumption that humans and chimps share a common, most recent common ancestor.
Okay.
Would you agree with that?
No, I don't.
You don't?
Why not? The first, you made 2-3 points.
And also, as a naturalist,
no,
you don't have to even believe in evolution.
Okay, but you've said 2-3 points which are unrelated, so I need to dissect each one. Okay. So firstly, when you said as a scientist, you don't need to start off with methodological naturalism. That's okay.
No, I didn't say that. What I said was, if you believe in naturalism, you don't have to believe in evolution. You could believe in spontaneous creation.
That's not the point I made, though. That's a red herring.
Because what you said was that if you're a naturalist, if you start with methodological naturalism, you have to believe that we have some kind of common ancestry with other animals. That's what you said, and that statement is false.
Because you're making a few points, I'm going to have to take notes.
That's fine.
Sorry. Yeah, go on.
There we go. Stops. So that's, I think that's an important point to stop on there about this, because the claim was, again, the point being made, or the attempted point being made, is, hey, if you're a naturalist, you have to go down this route. Therefore, the inference, although he's not saying it necessarily, is that you guys, there's no evidence that will change your mind. Now, obviously, Phil has explained this already, but the point being made, or attempted, as I say, is to say that, hey, your naturalists are forced. And Phil has given a perfectly reasonable and rational alternative that says, hey, you could be an atheist and still believe in spontaneous creation. But this, he will not respond to this point. Oh, okay, now you have actually brought an alternative, something that I haven't thought of or seen or heard of, or whatever the case is. And again, this is where it would be good for Phil to press him. Tell me, am I wrong? Is there any way that you can demonstrate that my statement that I've made about spontaneous creation from an atheistic point of view is wrong? If you can, then I'd have to go back to the drawing board.
Even the script that Subboor wants to go down can't really be justified, because if we want to say, he wants to say that it's an assumption that kind of two species having similarities is due to them being more closely related. But we can think, and so he's saying, oh, if you see two species with similar skeletons, and assuming that they're more closely related than two species with different skeletons, that's an assumption. And he justified that by saying, oh, well, what about what about the alternative of kind of God just like designing them that way? But I think even if we look at a particular realm of so-called homology or homological evidence, genes and DNA, we can say that it is not simply an assumption, because we can observe we can observe how DNA mutates over time, and we can observe the behavior of DNA under chemical conditions. We can understand how it works down to its chemistry, the same way that we kind of like investigate kind of chemistry in general. Okay, and so we know that DNA mutates over time at like sort of a rate. So that's the more, like if two strands of DNA are originally the same, then they're kind of like separate. Kind of the more differences they have, that would give us a measure of how sort of long ago they had become separate. And the second piece of that we know definitely happens is that we know that species split into other species, but don't really combine into the same species. So we have evidence of speciation events occurring that have been observed. We've observed one species over the course of the 20th century changing into a totally different species that can no longer reproduce to produce fertile offspring. One set of examples of this is plants, which have a kind of speciation that's called due to polyploidy, which is where they can no longer reproduce because they just both basically double the number of chromosomes they have, or replicate entire sets of chromosomes. They no longer can match up chromosomes when they sexually reproduce. And so we have these examples. So we know these two things. We know one, that DNA mutates, and we know that time being like kind of the number of generations, and we know also that species, the number of species kind of it increases because species split into other species. And so taking these two processes into account, just like a geologist will look at the surrounding evidence and come up with the theory of tectonic plates, or the theory of glaciation, or the theory of any other geological process, because they look at how things work on in the small scale, and then like of time, then extrapolate that backwards. So too do geneticists and biologists kind of look at this well understood behavior of speciation and DNA mutating, and they extrapolate that backwards in time, and that would kind of clearly kind of lend us to believe that species with more similar DNA were more closely related. And so that's not an assumption. That's based on it's a deduction based on evidence. And I'm sure like Phil will have made this point at some point during the talk as well. But so you'd call it an assumption if it's like kind of you're leaping to a conclusion and you don't have evidence to support it. But it's not an assumption. It's, if you're going to call that an assumption, then you would have to call just the field of geology an assumption, wouldn't you? Because geologists do the same thing, or any other historical science.
I want to just present something from Phil here. This was on his video, so I've put the link in the chat. Here's what he says as well. Subboor claimed that science always works via forming a hypothesis and then collecting data. This is simply false. Sometimes it works that way, and sometimes it works the other way. For example, scientists discovered quasars and then looked for explanation that could explain quasars. They didn't predict it ahead of time and then look for evidence of them. And I will post the link for those who are interested in the chat right now. There's the link for you, so you can go and look at that. So again, this is simply false. But I don't think this will convince either Subboor or anybody that supports Subboor. But it's worth bringing up here.
The whole point is you can test your assumptions, right? You can collect data and see if your assumptions are correct or incorrect. So again, if you look at the genetic data and you say, okay, if evolution is true, NaNoPA must be the youngest of all the pseudogenes. Now that data comes back to you,
okay,
and gives you an answer, and it doesn't depend on what you started with.
Okay, fine,
okay?
fine.
You'll have to explain how it is. Is it just coincidence that NaNoPA is the youngest pseudogene? So, tell me why. Why, if evolution is not true, why is it? Why is it that we share the same mistakes in the same location, and then with the one that we don't have happens to be dated before the split, just like evolution would predict? Tell me how that happened.
Let's do some counterfactuals, so you understand my point.
Okay, notice he hasn't responded to this, of course. And again, this...
Maybe he will now.
Say again?
Maybe he will now.
Yeah, well, he's trying to get a counterfactual. So, but what, he can always do that. But I think here's again where Phil can press him. Hey, I've asked you this question. Can you respond to this? Before you go to counterfactuals, can you respond to how you can explain this? Then we can talk about counterfactuals. But I've asked you a very specific question as to, if these mistakes are in both of, the chimp and the human, and this NaNoPA is the youngest, just as evolution predicts, how would you explain that? And if you just say God could do that, I mean, then that's not an explanation. You can just throw that in for anything. That's definitely God of the gaps. And would God really want to, duplicate mistakes in those different creatures? So, that's not an explanation. How would you explain that under your worldview? Okay, but carry on. I don't think he's going to answer, but I could be wrong.
Make an assumption that something is going to be there and it is there, or if something's going to be there and it's not there, it doesn't make a difference to the assumption of homology, and it doesn't make a difference.
You're right. He does not address this one little bit. He goes back onto his script, which he has rehearsed apparently, and he doesn't even understand, I think, what Phil was asking. And his
whole point here, he's on this thing, Stops, and I can kind of understand it in his worldview. His thing is, you assume homology, you see things out there that confirm homology, you conclude homology. In his view, this is circular. And Phil's point is, you don't need to start with homology. You could say, are we in any way related to any living creature on this planet? And how might we determine that? And then you go out there and you have a look and you go, ooh, we're not, there's certain things that make us, before you even assume homology, but his thing is, it's built in. Because the moment you start assuming that things are related in some way, that's homology. But as Phil has also said, it could be that they're not related. So even whether you start with homology or not, the evidence could disprove this claim. And in fact, we could be more closely related to whales or dolphins or something else. And that's not the case. And this is by the experts around the world. Now, either these experts are all entirely wrong, or perhaps, according to his view, and that would be a good question to ask, is this a big conspiracy theory that everybody just wants to overturn theism because they don't want to have a creationist story? And yet there are other people who are creationists, who are theists, who fully accept this, or they've got their own version, but their own version doesn't include the normal creation event. They presumably think that it all happened at the beginning of the universe, which is in some way a plausible hypothesis. If you go, hey, God lit the spark and he allowed evolution to take place. So these mistakes, that's all part of God's plan, because we're not claiming that he's a perfect creator. We're claiming that he's a creator and he lit the spark and he let things run. But claiming the way he is here, he just doesn't have an explanation. And so we just keep going back, as you say, to the homology thing. And he thinks he's got a circular argument that it's impossible to get out of. And so obviously it's just repeating that over and over again.
I wonder if there are really Muslims who will see that he now is not answering the question.
No, they won't stop.
He is not going to address the fundamental question that is at the heart of this whole debate here. He is not answering this. And I wonder if a Muslim actually realizes that Subboor is running away from the discussion, going back into his little safe corner, and that's it. He will not address the questions which are being asked at the moment. I wonder if there's any Muslim out here who will say, yeah, because what is interesting, there was a Christian who says, okay, I'm not a Muslim, I'm a theist, but I agree that Subboor was on the ropes and then all he could do is fake it and run away. That there was nothing from an argumentative point of view that he brought up that was valid or that in any way could rattle the theory of evolution.
Yeah, and you're quite right. I just want to read a comment from Detective Inspector Monkfish. And of course, intelligent design, at least they try to do that. We can give them credit for attempting to do that. They put forward, hypothesis and try to prove it with a flagellum and other things like that. And they still obviously try to do that. At least they're attempting to trying to bring evidence. Obviously, it's been rebutted, if not refuted, but they're at least trying to go the scientific route. What I noticed with Subboor in particular is he's been reduced, or he's fallen back onto the philosophical position. That's all they have. Because if you go look at older videos, he's stepped back his position, from what I can tell, quite a bit. Because he never, evolution was always a big challenge in and of itself, and now all he's focused on is human-chimp ancestry. So, and he's even said in one debate, I'm sure, that he doesn't even accept intelligent design or normal creation in some way. I have to go and get it. I don't want to misquote it, but I was very surprised about that. But let me just read Detective Inspector Monkfish, who's well versed in this particular topic and with Subboor. Common descent is assumed because there is such strong evidence for it. To say it is assumed simply means scientists consider it so well established that it can justifiably be taken as given. So there we go.
Yeah, but again, you can't say that it's just an assumption. You can't say that out of the blue somebody assumed that something was going on, and then nothing was ever found that would corroborate this or would substantiate this or would in any form validate it. That is not true. But this is what the implication is from what Subboor is, what he's saying, is that this is just an assumption, and that's it. No, it's not. Number one, there was some data which led to this. And then somebody said, this is the way that you normally work. You then have an hypothesis, and then you build on this, and then you verify this or not. And that is exactly what happened.
And it's happening today. There are different views out there. And Subboor mentioned, I went to look into it, and Detective Inspector Monkfish has done a much deeper investigation with the third wave. These are guys who fully accept common descent, which is the underlying main part, if I can use that term, I'm not a scientist, main part of evolution, but they believe that there's another mechanism that can explain this. And so they're challenging the Darwinian mechanism, but they still believe that it's a naturalistic thing. But these are people who, so that the mechanism can be challenged, but the time to take them seriously is when the overwhelming evidence that they present is accepted by the overwhelming majority. Because, if somebody presents us evidence, we're not going to be in a position to evaluate it. So if the overwhelming majority of scientists believe it because the evidence points to it, and it can make predictions, as Phil has talked about, and those predictions are shown to be true, that's very strong evidence in favor of that.
Overall epistemic weighing of human-chimp ancestry. That's the point I was making. I'll give you some evidence for this. Okay. So we and chimps are supposed to have a recent common ancestor. So why is it that if somebody was to use the assumption of homology and then go ahead, why is it that the closest to us in human behavior is not actually the chimpanzee, is actually the ant? Ants have warfare, ants have economics, ants have actually...
chimps also have warfare.
Hang on one second. Don't finish his point. Sociologically, according to evolutionary biologists, the closest thing to human beings is actually the ant. And there's a book on this, E.O. Wilson's The Social Conquest of the Earth, right? And there's other atheist evolutionary biologists who've admitted the closest to the human being in terms of our social capabilities is the ant. The closest to human beings in terms of our intellectual capabilities is actually the crow, right? Now,
there is no way that you can get any animal which is closer to a human than a chimpanzee if you're looking at the whole, the whole variety of behavioral patterns that we have.
Yeah, that was my thought.
Taking one specific one out now and saying, explain to me why ants are doing the same. Explain why crows are doing the same. That is so stupid. That is so unbelievably, ridiculously ridiculous. It's so stupid. I can't believe it.
Well, that was a sort of thought that struck me, was this is cherry picking a couple of potential, and we can say potential at this stage, similarities, but they're not physical similarities in any way. So he said they're social, and Phil will come back and say that monkeys do X, Y, and Z, and so forth. But that's just cherry picking one sort of social thing. But there's many other animals that also do that. So who's to what? And again, I haven't read the book, and I suspect he hasn't either. He's just quoting a book, which is sort of more his style. But what is the evidence that ants are the closest in social? And let's be charitable and assume they were the closest. What is that supposed to say? And in his view, that's counterfactual evidence, because that goes against the claim of homology, that similarities. And I think normally, my understanding, and I'm definitely not an expert, so I'm pleased in the comments, correct me if I'm wrong, normally, please, Detective Monkfish in particular, is homology not primarily focused on similarities within the structure of the organism, as opposed to its social behavior and makeup? I could be wrong, but that seems to me that the main claim about homology, not the social thing, because you can, that's much more difficult to do, isn't it? You can look at ants, you could look at chimps, you could look at other animals and say, oh, well, this one does slightly better than that one. And it seems to me, A, that's cherry picking, and B, I don't know how you could prove that to be the case. How do you know that they are more social than chimps? Does it take longer? Is there more of them? What sort of thing are you going to do to claim that they have more of a social, they're closer to us in some way in their social behavior? seems cherry picking to me.
And I like the comments. Ants are just like us; they can talk.
Yes. If you believe the Quran, they can talk. Well, that would make them closer in communication. I grant that. If they could in fact talk English or Arabic or no other animal that we're aware of can do that, then yes, you would have an argument that. But again, that's just cherry picking one thing. That wouldn't necessarily mean that they're closest related to us.
I like dog knobhead with the arrow pointing ape. Yes, I too. I am a type of an ape, and every human being is a type of an ape. I mean, that's okay. Now I'm spouting hate speech, right, by saying that we are all types of an ape.
Well, we all come from that sort of lineage, don't we? A common ancestor. Okay, we're split off. I mean, we are like you say, a type. I mean, again, we'd have to
That's
ask
hate speech.
Aaron Ra what that is, and somebody could type it in immediately what the biological term for us is. But yeah. All right, let's carry on. Otherwise, we'll never get done.
Those observations which go against the sort of a priori sort of, before looking at the evidence, if someone was to assume if homology is true, then this would be true. Those haven't changed at all the epistemic weighing of human chimp ancestry, those dissimilarities. Why haven't they? Because the assumption that you begin with is always going to remain an assumption, and the similarities that you see, you're going to say are due to common ancestry. The dissimilarities you're going to say are due to homoplasy. There is no piece of evidence that can undermine that.
Okay, all right. So first off, the statement that humans and ants are the most similar.
Sociologically.
All you said was that because they have. Let me just say, what was the evidence for that? They have warfare.
Okay, let me give you some.
So one at a time. One was warfare, correct?
Okay,
correct.
And
chimps also have warfare. So that seems like pretty weak evidence to me. What was the next one?
Okay, one second. So let me explain how sociology works. I think you've made a misrepresentation. Of course, they both have warfare.
Right.
Except in ant colonies, and this isn't according to me, this is according to the evolutionary biologists who study this. In ant colonies, you have massive warfare where millions of ants go out and they fight. And not only do they go out and fight, you actually have ants which go out and apply medicine to the ants which are actually injured. Now, the complex level of warfare that ants have is totally different to human to chimp warfare. Now, when it comes to human and chimp being similar in terms of the sociological behavior, and humans and ants actually being closer than humans and chimps, this is not something I've said. This is something evolutionary biologists have come to the conclusion of. And of course, those conclusions can be revised based on new data, but that's the conclusion that they've actually come to. Now,
so, stop it there again. So I'll accept that because it suits my argument. But of course, science is always changing, so we shouldn't take anything as absolute fact. But I'll jump on this because some, and maybe one or two probably, we'd have to look this up, and maybe Detective Inspector Monkfish or somebody else can tell us, how many so-called biologists accept this claim that ants are the closest in their warfare and so forth. But so again, this is the other thing. Why even go along? Why even claim science? And of course, he wants to get away from science because that's the biggest problem that Islam has is science. I mean, it's just devastating. So if they can somehow sidestep science, but then I'll appeal to it when it suits me, and then but also in the same breath say that it could change. So why are you doing that?
Atheist evolutionary biologist.
He's not an atheist, you're wrong.
He is an atheist.
No, he isn't. I've got your quote from you.
He's always doing this.
You're wrong.
He is an atheist evolutionary biologist. He's based here. Okay, we can deal with whether he's an atheist or not later. Okay. Let's deal with his point.
No, this is what I hate about the way that Subboor argues, that he just makes claims which are totally wrong, and then, I am wrong. Okay, then let's deal with this later. No, you don't go and make these stupid assumptions, these stupid claims, if you know full well that they are wrong. And this is what I hate, and he does it all the time. Everybody is an atheist if they say something he doesn't like.
His point here is this. Yeah. In his book, An Accidental Species, talking about us, he writes in that book that humans and ants are the closest sociologically. And he's the senior editor of Nature.
No, he isn't.
Who cares?
He's not the senior editor of Nature?
No.
Henry Gee?
Correct.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. Because Nature doesn't have a senior editor. It has a whole bunch of senior editors. Okay? and you're misquoting him. Let me give you a quote from Henry Gee. Okay.
Wait, hang on a second. Okay. What about the point I just made?
Okay, I'll respond. Let me respond. Okay, let me respond. Okay, first
you've been jumping around a lot.
Okay, well, so are you, right? Okay.
I refuse your points and jump on. You jump on without me.
Stop there again.
Now wear your glasses again, because until you show me homology, until
let me respond. Let me respond. You can wear it, right? Okay. Okay.
So these are the assumptions of homology, and once he shows me that scientists don't have this assumption, I'll take them off.
Okay, first off,
I don't need your help.
Okay, all right. Okay, first off,
I don't need your help.
So first off, Subboor's wrong about Henry Gee being an atheist. Henry Gee, sorry. I am with the scientists of an earlier age who found that their motivation in advancing the cause of knowledge was to magnify the name of the Creator. Okay, so that was in nature. That was his own words, right? He also says, right. He never disputes that humans and chimps share a common ancestor. He agrees with that.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
I know.
Right, and he also agrees that the fossil evidence supports evolution. Agreed?
Based on the assumption of homology.
No, it's not based on the assumption of homology. It is based off of the evidence that we actually have.
Can I see
Let's just go. Hang on.
Can I see that quote?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. You can. There's the source.
Oh boy.
Check it.
It's just filibustering. Hey, I'll just waste time now because I've been refuted, and instead of conceding that point.
No, agreed. It was 1 point at a time, right? 1 point.
In another place, he said he's an atheist.
That's what I have. I mean,
and that is not clear. That's not clear.
Give me your quote that says he's an atheist.
But I don't have it with me right now.
Well,
but listen,
that is why.
Well, you want me to memorize every single person?
Yes, exactly. That's what you do. You don't make claims you can't substantiate.
Was that we would swap our statements ahead of time, because then we can check who's misquoting and who's not misquoting.
But him being an atheist...
you didn't want to do that.
Wait, hang on a second.
You didn't want to do that because you said it was boring.
Wait, hang on. Well, Phil, look. Whether Henry Gee is an atheist or he's not an atheist, how on earth does that change our conversation?
Because stop it. It changes the conversation because it shows once again that you are dishonest and disingenuous, and you don't concede a point when it's shown to you that the evidence is the opposite. That's how it changes the conversation. And every time Phil brings up just one of these little points, it just shows again that you don't concede. Hey, do you know what? I could be wrong. I'm going to go back and look at that, and I won't mention that Henry Gee is an atheist again until I've got concrete evidence of it. And the fact that you've given me other evidence, I'll go back and confirm that. But not once do we ever hear a point that's been conceded. Because remember what this is, again, I'm going to just make it for those who are not listening. This is not for us or Phil or anybody that's thinking critically that's a non-Muslim. This is for the Muslim brothers and sisters who are watching that will believe anything that comes out of his mouth. And as long as he can sidestep the point that because they're not paying attention or they don't understand what's going on here, then it looks like their man is winning. I mean, the number of comments that just said that this guy, transphil here, that just shows how completely hypnotized people are.
Next point, right? The point is
you need to address these glasses.
Okay, Henry Gee, right, agrees that humans and chimps share a common ancestor. He agrees that the fossil
based on homology.
No, where does he say it's based off homology? He says it's based off of the evidence.
If you look at Henry Gee and all of evolutionary biologists, including philosophers of biology, they all have said the same thing, which is that we have the assumption of homology in our field. And this isn't just about one guy said this or another guy said this. Look, I want you to tell me something, right? If there is a book which is published by, say, a reputable publisher, which has an atheist philosopher of science or an atheist evolutionary biologist who says a particular thing, and then you come here and you say something else different, then should I go with what I have in front of me or should I go with what you have?
You should go with the evidence. That's what you should do.
And the evidence is that when
this is a quote from Henry Gee. Let me read it out to you, okay? They had the 150th anniversary of the publication of The Origin of Species. And Henry Gee organized, or he wrote this, about they had this thing to celebrate that in Nature, okay? And this is what Henry Gee said. The articles in this insight testify to the success of Charles Darwin's theory of descent with modification by means of natural selection, carefully detailed in his book On the Origin of Species almost years ago. Its simplicity. Given heritable variation, the superabundance of offspring, and environmental change, natural selection must happen, and evolution will follow. So he says the assumptions are genetic heritability and variation, superabundance of offspring, and environmental change. That's it. That's the three things that he says. He never says based off the assumption of homology. So he says based off those three assumptions.
Wait, hang on a second.
And also he says this. Let me give you one more quote from Henry Key. Darwin would have been safe. Okay, hang on. Darwin would have been safe had no fossils ever been discovered. It remains the case, however, that fossils provide direct evidence of evolutionary change in our past.
Okay? Where does it say he doesn't have the assumption of homology?
Come on, let's carry on. Yeah, just carry on, Stops. He's going to just keep saying that. This is the go-to thing every single time, isn't it? And I don't have a response to anything you're saying. I'm just going to say, how's that disprove homology? How does that disprove homology? It's like a broken record.
Well, where does it? Where he says that natural selection, evolution follows from three things: heritable variation, selection, superabundance of offspring, and environmental change.
Okay, now what you've done is you've actually committed a fallacy. You've committed the fallacy of equivocation. We are speaking about homology, and he's speaking about natural selection. Now, homology is a necessary condition for human chimp ancestry to be true, but it's not a sufficient condition. For it to be sufficient, you need a mechanism. And a mechanism, in terms of science, can never be proven because of the inductive nature of science. Now, what you've done there is you've said he is assuming these things, but those are the assumptions of natural selection. Now, Henry Gee and any other evolutionary biologist in the world, they do actually believe in the assumption of homology, and they also, prior to that, have the assumption of methodological naturalism. Now, Elliot Sober, who is an atheist, again, evolutionary biologist, if you're not dispute he's an atheist, we can deal with that too. He's an atheist evolutionary biologist. In his book, Evidence and Evolution, which is published by by Cambridge University, he says, the idea that humans and chimps must share a common ancestor because they're so similar, and humans and mushrooms must share, must have independent ancestry because they're so different, they're both naive. Because within a probabilistic framework, there is no must. And he goes on in that same very book, speaking about homology, homoplasy, and the ad hoc rationalizations which do actually exist in the field of evolutionary biology.
Wait, hang on one second. So what I want you to do is this. I want you to show me that scientists don't begin off with the assumption of homology. Don't take a word of a scientist out of context. I want you to show me as a field they don't begin off with the assumption of homology. And two, I want you to show me how it's possible to have a conversation about homology without speaking about the mechanism. Because if you can show all the similarities between humans and chimps, humans and pigs, humans and whatever, if there is no mechanism of transformation, all you have is a story. Which is why, and this is the last point I'm going to make, you can try and refute all these points, human chimp ancestry was something which the ancient Greeks believed in, the ancient Hindus believed in, the Enlightenment Victorian thinkers also believed in, including Darwin and his grandfather. The reason why this idea took off is because Darwin gave a mechanism, the mechanism of natural selection. If the mechanism breaks, or if the mechanism is shown to be insufficient, you cannot claim human chimp ancestry is true. Okay.
Stop it there for a moment. Hopefully, Detective Inspector Monkfish has got that claim as well, because I thought he said originally that natural selection requires homology as an assumption. I could be mistaken. I thought that's what he said, about 5 minutes ago. But
that's what I heard as well.
Okay, so that's what
needs homology, which is no.
But Detective Inspector Monkfish has also got some quotes about this claim that he's just made here. If there isn't a mechanism, if we don't know the mechanism, then human chimp ancestry cannot be demonstrated. And I'm pretty sure that Detective Inspector Monkfish, he's been literally debunking this for a year and a half, brought forward quotes from about 12 or 15 philosophers of biology or in biology. I apologize if that's not the correct terminology, that say that that if natural selection was shown not to be the correct mechanism, that wouldn't undermine common descent. In other words, for those who are watching, the the common descent itself is not reliant on natural selection, as far as I go, and I could be mistaken. So, Det, if you just tell me, I have over 50 quotes who strongly disagree with him. Okay, so Detective Inspector Monkfish has 50 quotes. So again, this is cherry picking. And here's the other thing, by the way, if you notice what happens here, he will make a bunch of assertions, supposedly claiming that he's reading these from the books, and then Phil has to refute him. These are assertions. These are not, that he hasn't brought evidence. When he quotes a book, he thinks that this is somehow evidence, that he's made an argument, he's made an assertion, and then the burden of proof is now for Phil to disprove his assertion, instead of saying, provide me the evidence of your assertion, because at the moment, I don't believe you. My default position is I do not believe a word you say. So please provide me the evidence. I'm not going to go and refute something, your assertion, without you first providing evidence that it's true.
Exactly. This is the point. I think people don't realize that whatever point Subboor brings up, it is being refuted. On top of which, every claim that he makes is either false or is a blatant lie.
Without the mechanism, it's like you have a bridge and you have two foundations. The foundations break and you want to cross the bridge. You cannot. Darwin's theory is not a theory about similarity. It's a similarity. It's a theory about natural selection leading A to Z.
Okay. All right. So what Subboor did was totally and utterly misquote Elliot Sober. Okay. So what he said was true, that Elliot Sober says you can't just look at similarities and then derive common ancestry. That's naive. And I agree with that. I agree with that right from the start. Right. But what Elliot Sober goes on to say, what he goes on to say was, and this is a direct quote, you can look this up in that very book, the torpedo shape found in sharks and dolphins does not provide strong evidence for their having common ancestor. Natural selection favors this shape in large aquatic predators, so we'd expect it to be present in modern sharks and dolphins, regardless of whether they have a common ancestor. In contrast, the gill slits found on human embryos and in many fish are evidence of a common ancestor, precisely because they have no adaptive utility in human embryos. The term vestigial carries the double meaning that Darwin intended. Vestigial traits are useless to the organism and they are vestiges of a bygone age. By recognizing they are useless, we see they provide substantial information about the past. Now, this is the point. It's true that you can't just look at similarities and then say, right, that's down to common ancestry, that's homology. You have to do things that are more sophisticated than that. Let me give you another piece of evidence to show you how this is done, okay? So let me go back to my little presentation here, okay? So, let's go to something called amino acid functional redundancy. No.
You can see Phil came prepared, and I know Phil, and we've chatted, and he's chatted to Detective Inspector Monkfish and others. He does his homework. You know, obviously you're not going to be able to refute every single assertion that somebody made, but you can see he came there and he'd done his homework. He knew, you know, what he knows about what he's talking about, but he's got the evidence as well, because obviously these claims have been made by Subboor for years, and so they're easy to look up. Now, virtually no Muslim will look them up, but the rest of us, or in this particular case, it was Phil and Detective Inspector Monkfish, both of whom I trust. I can go look it up myself, but I just do double work when these guys have done it already, and they are, you know, incredibly honest and meticulous with their work. And so he'd done his homework here. But the point on that one was that, hey, we've got these gill slits, and that has no value to us, you know, in a human embryo. The fact that they've got, you know, these the noses is what you would expect in larger fish in water, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're related. So that's, and again, this may go over some people's heads, and I'm not an expert, but at least I understand that particular point as well. And notice, of course, what Phil could have done here again is stop at that point and go, okay, what is your explanation for this? And hold his feet to the fire. His feet was never ready. He did it on a couple of occasions, but Subboor was able to skirt this around. What you have to do here is not allow him to say anything else but to answer that question. Anything else is a skirt around, red herring, straw man, just a deflection. And that's the difficult part, is to hold him, because you can just bring up some term that makes him sound smart, and all the gullible and hypnotized Muslims will go, wow, he made a point and you didn't refute it. He didn't answer the question. He just brought up some scientific or philosophical term so as he doesn't have to answer the question.
And the other thing is, what Phil unfortunately does not point out is that he has shown once again that Subboor does not understand his own quotes.
Yes. He's not read these books. I'm pretty sure he hasn't read these books. And so he's quoting a book. He's probably picked up these quotes from a creationist website. So he's never actually read the book cover to cover. Or if he has, as you quite rightly say, if he came across that paragraph, he didn't understand it at all and just went on, because that would have stopped you in your tracks and go, whoa, hang on a moment. I've just read something here and he said that. Let me go and find out what's going on here. But of course, none of that happens.
For you to make a point and move on.
No, but it's important.
No. Wait, that's a separate point.
Hang on.
Listen. I'm here all day. Let's deal with that point. How does that undermine?
I'm not here all day.
Well, I am. Okay, so how does that undermine the point which I made about him?
Because you misquoted Elliot Sober.
How?
What you misquoted him, because what Elliot Sober said was you can't just look at similarities and then say, okay, that's down to common ancestry. And I agree with that. But what he said afterwards was that if you look at similarities in functional things, that might be down to common ancestry, might not be. But if you look at similarities in non-functional things, then you can conclude common ancestry. That's what Elliot Sober says. Elliot Sober is very clear.
Okay,
you can conclude common ancestry,
hang on
and you're quoting him to say that you can't.
It's a really strange situation where somebody says you are misquoting this person, and then when they are explaining how you're misquoting that person, they misquote them themselves.
How did I misquote?
Here's exactly what Elliot Sober said. He said, the idea that humans and chimpanzees have a common ancestor, the idea that they must have a common ancestor because they're so similar, and the idea that humans and mushrooms must have independent ancestry because they're so different, both of these are naive because they are based on a probabilistic framework, and within a probabilistic framework, there is no must in either case. He is describing homology as an assumption, and that assumption of homology fits into a probabilistic framework, which also has other assumptions, such as a mechanism of natural selection, which also has other assumptions, such as gradualism and vertical gene transfer and so on and so on. So what I said there, he did not undermine what he's describing later. Elliot Sober, what he's basically saying is that you cannot claim human-chimp ancestry is true, literally, is a must, because it's still based on a probabilistic framework, which is exactly what I was saying.
Okay, let me respond, right? What Sober is saying is that you can't just look at the similarities and conclude common ancestry. I totally agree with that. No one is doing that. Let me show you how we do this, okay? Here's another piece of evidence, okay? This is called amino acid functional redundancy. So if you look at...
Okay, it's going to the level now where he's saying, well, he doesn't say all doors must be round. Well, who says that he says all doors must be round? This is the whole point.
Nobody claimed that it's... But the probabilistic, and I think, did we do it earlier or was it coming up later? When Phil gives him a probabilistic thing of 1 billion to 1, he doesn't accept that. So if the probabilities is 1 billion to 1 that this is the case, and I'm sure it comes up later on, at what point is probabilistic framework enough to be accepted as, quote, a fact? Not an absolute fact, whatever the hell that's supposed to be, but a fact. At what point do we accept something as a fact of the natural world? And again, maybe in his world, only absolute facts like mathematics. Well, that's great. That just undermines your point as a theist then. You can't claim anything then that's absolute, especially not the Quran.
Should I jump to 1.5 hours?
You're getting tired. Okay, yeah, we can go forward.
If humans and chimps share a common ancestor, right, then what we should find is that the genetic diversity in human populations should be highest at the center of origin. This is called Vavilov's theory. This is widely accepted in genetics. The origin center is where you have the highest genetic diversity. So if we found, we could look at different ethnicities, Europeans, Eskimos, Native Americans, Aboriginals, whoever. And if evolution is true, sub-Saharan Africans should have the highest genetic diversity. If it turned out that Eskimos had the highest genetic diversity, that would be evidence against human chimp common ancestry. That would be evidence against human.
Wait.
Right?
Now,
If
hang on.
now,
That's a non sequitur. That's a total non sequitur. You're assuming, and this is a very racist thing, by the way, that East Africa is where you have the great apes, and that's where the black people are.
No,
so
that's where you have the fossil.
Wait, hang on.
It's not racist.
It is racist, and I'll tell you why.
How is it racist?
I'll tell you why. Because you actually have fossils which are also in other parts of Asia, such as China, which could also be interpreted as the beginning of human beings. Now, your argument is a non sequitur. Okay.
The oldest hominid fossils are all in East
You made your point.
They're all in Sub-Saharan Africa, and that's where then we should find the highest genetic diversity.
The oldest fossil of recently that discovered of a human being is actually in Morocco. North Africa.
A human being?
Yes.
That's not what we're talking about. Yes. We're talking about the oldest hominid fossils, where Australopithecus is,
yes.
where Orinid is,
yes.
where all these nothing to do with where
but you're assuming,
the oldest modern human is. That's just ridiculous.
You're assuming those are human ancestors.
Well, no. If that's where human ancestry is, then we can confirm it with another piece of evidence. That's the point. This is what you completely misunderstand every time. So you say, oh, we're just assuming this, we're just assuming this, we're just assuming this. Okay. But the whole point is the data can confirm or deny the assumptions.
Wait, hang on.
And the data overwhelmingly confirms it.
Okay,
this is the whole point.
Phil, here's the thing. The fossils which are found in East Africa, those fossils, none of them, and here's the point which I'm making, have been proven to be human ancestors. Those fossils. Wait, hang on a second. Every single one of those fossils that's been discovered, those discoveries are based on the assumption of homology, and the assumption which is actually made. Here's the point. I'm going to make an argument. No. Sir, I'm doing one person at a time. I'll speak to you next. Lucy is assumed to be a human chimp ancestor. Is supposed to be our recent sort of, if you like, grandmother, because she was discovered in Africa, and she was supposed to be bipedal. Now, I want you to.
Evidence says it.
Wait, hang on. Why didn't researchers use the ape which was discovered in southern Italy, which is 10 million years old, 7 million years older, as a human chimp ancestor?
You keep quoting this because you haven't given a reference for it.
Okay, wait, it's coming. I actually rang a friend for it. I work.
Christmas is also coming.
Oh wait, it just came in. Good timing.
Phil's going to look this up, by the way, now. And this is going to be amazing.
Bambuli, and here it is. Journal of Human Evolution. So the point which I was making stands. If you look at any fossil,
look at it.
That fossil, you're using that fossil and you're basing it on an assumption of homology, and you're saying that this is a human chimp ancestor. But that assumption is not reconfirmed by you looking at similarities. Because that argument would be like this. That would be like, similarities are due to common descent. Similarities exist, therefore similarities are due to common descent. But that would actually be circular reasoning. Why didn't these researchers use the ape?
Have you got back to the beginning of the video?
The fully bipedal.
No, it sounds so familiar.
Because Darwin and the people prior to him, they were actually racist, and they wanted to show that the black person is much closer to the other primates than the Caucasian people. So they didn't use the ape in southern Italy, which is 10 million years old, fully bipedal. Rather, they used an ape which was 3.
I wonder if he says it's fully bipedal. Who made that assumption? How did they find out that it was fully bipedal? Doesn't he?
Well, you can actually do it through the interesting thing that I saw is that you can actually do it if you have certain of the fossil parts, particularly the back of
the hip bones, of course, the whole pelvic area, the whole everything that's exactly the evidence that you need to come to a conclusion that this is bipedal. But he says it's an assumption. So what he is now doing is he's saying your assumption is wrong. My assumption is correct because it's an assumption which shows it's fully bipedal. But he doesn't say how he gets to the conclusion that it's fully bipedal. So it must be an assumption that he's just said is unreliable.
Any fossil which he brings up is the same as the genetic evidence, the same as the anatomical evidence, is still based on the assumption of homology,
No,
which,
it's
by the
not.
way, and this thing Phil has not addressed at all. He has not addressed this point at all, which is...
I'm sorry, he has refuted every single point that he's brought up. He's showed him that he doesn't understand what he's talking about, and now he says nothing has been... I can't understand this.
Homology, necessary condition to establish human chimp ancestry is not sufficient. For it to even remotely be sufficient, you need a mechanism of natural selection or any other mechanism. And this whole time, he did not speak even the smallest amount about the mechanism. Without the mechanism, at best, all you have is a story.
Okay. Let me read you the paper that Subboor thinks is evidence.
Now listen to this. Listen to this, because this is what Phil is now reading part of the paper for this bipedal ape. So let's listen into this, because Phil didn't have this paper prior, so he's been reading. He had a quick look at this now, because Subboor brought this up out of the blue. So let's listen in what was.
Hang on, this is Subboor's paper.
This is the paper that talks about this bipedal ape. Yeah.
He just gave me.
No. I gave you the paper with the name of the actual fossil.
Results. Results further show that the sacrum exhibits relatively small pezerogapicial articular facet surface areas and mediolaterally narrow, also compared with modern humans, indicating that the morphology of Oreopithecus sacrum is incompatible with the functional demands of habitual bipedal stance and locomotion. The Oreopithecus lumbar region does not exhibit adaptations for habitual bipedal locomotion. So you're...
Oh boy. Oh boy. That's what it looks like when you bring a claim that you haven't read, you didn't understand, and in fact the conclusion says exactly the opposite.
Game, set, and match. Come on.
That doesn't disprove all the claims, but I mean, if you're going to bring something else, at least read the entire thing. My goodness.
Own paper contradicts you.
No.
Yes, it does. Right, now hang on.
Hang on.
I didn't interrupt. I've got to respond.
Go on.
Okay, and we've got to wrap up because we've been here more than 2 hours. Okay, right.
I didn't. Wait. Hang on. This ape is.
I didn't interrupt you.
Wait. Hang on a second. Before you make your point, let me just make a simple point about this. No. This particular ape, it can walk on two, and it doesn't do that all the time. It also has locomotion. But Lucy was something which they think was transitioning towards actual bipedalism, or according to some, wait, hang on a second. According to some, according to some, it is fully bipedal. Whatever it actually is, the point which I was actually making is this: why would they go with something which is 4 million years old and not go with something which is 10 million years old? Because they had a previous theory of this, right? And even if there was no fossil evidence of any hominid, which is what you said earlier about Henry Gee. Even if there was no fossils, human chimp ancestry would still be true, which is what you said earlier.
We have independent evidence from
no, you don't have independent evidence because it's based on the assumption of homology.
From embryology, we have, yes, it would be true if we had no fossils. Because
exactly, that's the point.
No, Subboor.
You just admitted the same point.
No, okay, let me finish. Right? Okay. The whole point is, yes, it would be true if we had no fossils.
There you go.
Sorry, can I finish without you interrupting?
So what's the... Okay, go on.
Okay, because we have multiple lines of evidence from independent fields of study. So if we didn't have any fossils, and there's no reason why we have to have fossils, it's very difficult for a fossil to form. It's very rare that a fossil ever is going to form. So there's no reason why we have to have fossils, okay? So if we didn't have any fossils, we've still got the genetics, we've still got the biogeography, we have other lines of evidence, and that's what Henry Gee was saying, right? But we do have the fossils. Now, he's saying that this thing can occasionally be bipedal. that's irrelevant. Lots of animals can occasionally go up on their feet, right? A meerkat can occasionally go up on its feet. But what is interesting to paleontology is whether you have an animal that actually predominantly walks on its feet. That's what you need a particular anatomy for. So you have something, the way the skull attaches to the rest of the body, that has to be a certain way if you're going to have consistent bipedal walking. And that's what Australopithecus has. And Australopithecus has these transitional forms. It has a spine, an attachment of the magnum, I forget the name, magnum something is the name of the attachment, and that attaches just like it's bipedal. But it also has features that are similar to chimpanzees, because it has fingers and feet that are more flexible, so that it can climb trees as well. So that's the transitional forms that we have. Okay. Now he was talking about racism. I mean, saying Darwin was racist. Almost everyone in the 19th century.
That's not
racist,
true,
right?
That's not true. But I do. Sorry.
Irrelevant. It's completely and utterly irrelevant. The evidence that we share common ancestries with chimpanzees, there's nothing racist about that. The idea we say that the genetic diversity is highest in Africans because the fossil evidence leads us to Africa. Okay.
Okay. Should I jump to 115?
About African people.
Hang on one sec. Let's just finish this point, then jump there.
Okay. All it's saying is that's where we find the fossils, so that's where we should find the genetic diversity. We have the hypothesis.
Well, why not the fossil in Italy?
Because it's not a bipedal ape. That's why. Okay, I'm done.
Right, stop there.
You can conclude.
Wait, hang on.
You can jump on it a little bit. Okay, so he's clearly shown that it's not a bipedal ape. Even the paper says it's not a bipedal ape, and he wants to leave now. And of course, Subboor doesn't want to be shown to be, having been refuted, which clearly he has. And so now it's a case of no, I'm not going to let you go. I'm going to try and bring up another irrelevant point or bring up some other point. So it looks like at the end I've won. There we go. To be scientifically literate is to empower yourself to know when someone else is full of bullshit. Neil deGrasse Tyson. Yes. There we go. I think the video is there for you to watch. Stops if you can just post it there for anybody who hasn't seen it. I mean, if you haven't seen it. But again, whether you believe in evolution or not, at least look at, the evidence that's been presenting. If you're going to present bad evidence, this fossil was found in Italy, and in fact the paper that you yourself bring does not claim what you claim. That is a serious problem. But of course, we'll have Muslims here and people who watch this will go right over their head. They will still carry on believing this is an honest, genuine guy that has really got expertise in this field, and that's the dangerous part. Not that he's talking nonsense, but that people believe it. That's the unfortunate / dangerous part about it.